Throughout the Smoky Mountains, tales of the devil run rampant. One place that has an unnaturally high amount of devil stories is the Nolichucky River. The Nolichucky River flows 115 miles through western North Carolina and East Tennessee. On its way through the Smoky Mountains, it crosses the Pisgah and Cherokee National Forests. Along the river's banks stand some of the tallest mountains in Appalachia, including Mount Mitchell, the highest peak in the eastern United States. As you can imagine, a place so remote tends to gather the most eerie of stories. Along the route of the Nolichucky River looms a hauntingly dangerous cliff face locals call the Devil's Looking Glass. Hundreds of feet tall, this cliff holds spirits of the dead and perhaps the devil himself. The waters below the cliff are notoriously swift and churn underneath, threatening the lives of any who choose to visit unprepared. An old Cherokee tale tells the story of a woman's grief. As the story goes, a Cherokee woman and her lover were very close to one another. Her lover was called to fight for the Cherokee people, but never returned. The Cherokee woman's grief ended up being too much for her, so she climbed to the top of the Devil's Looking Glass and threw herself off the cliff. As she plummeted into the water below, she called for her lost lover to come back to her. It is said that if you visit the waters below the cliff in the early morning, you can hear her screaming for her lover to come back to this day. If you have spent any time interested in the supernatural in the Smoky Mountains, you will no doubt have come upon banshees. Banshees are thought to be dangerous to humans, but in fact, the opposite is true. Banshees are known to try to warn humans that death is approaching. One such instance on the Nolichucky River happened to a family of 3. As the story goes, a man and his pregnant wife had stopped near the Devil's Looking Glass on the Nolichucky to camp for the night. As the night went on, the man started hearing noises that he thought were bobcats in the area. So he set out to hunt the bobcats down. But he quickly noticed that as he followed the sound, it didn't get closer. In fact, at one point, it sounded like one scream came from every direction. So he rushed back to his campsite, where he found his wife in labor. Hours later, both his wife and his newborn baby passed away. What he heard that night was not a bobcat, but the screams of a banshee telling of the impending deaths. By far the most unnerving story I've ever heard about the devil in the Nolichucky River is the story of the Lone Rider. This Lone Rider rides up and down the Nolichucky River banks near the Devil's Looking Glass. The sound of hoofbeats rise as they approach you on a moonless night. Right when they get the loudest and the sound closest, they head in the opposite direction. No one ever sees who the Lone Rider is, except for a blurry shadow against the night. One night, a couple of decades ago, a group of locals set out to figure out who the Lone Rider was, so they could stop him from scaring people in the dead of the night. As they camped on the riverbank, one of them kept watch. As 3 a.m. approached, the man on watch heard the sound of hoofbeats in the distance. He alerted the men, and they set up a tripwire along the riverbank to stop the Lone Rider. As the hoofbeats were at their loudest, the men saw a blurry shadow skirt across their visual field and snag the tripwire just as planned. Only the tripwire didn't stop the rider. He carried on as if the wire wasn't even there, riding off in the other direction. The men were immediately terrified because whatever hit that wire couldn't have been a ghost, but when they examined the hoof prints it left behind, they turned out to be the prints of a goat, not a horse. From that moment on, the river became locally known as the Devil's Run because the men that night had been convinced they had witnessed the devil. No one has since tried to find the Lone Rider, and everyone is warned not to be around the banks of the river on moonless nights.